So thank you so much for being here, Melissa. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this really important community issue. I just want to start off with just a simple question. How long have you lived in Coconut Grove? How long have you been a resident here?
So, well, I went to middle school here. So I went to Carver Middle School and Ponce de Leon Junior High. That was in the 70s. So I've been around for that long. But then I did high school and college in North Carolina, and then I came back. But I've been on the same street in Coconut Grove for 28 years in the same house.
Nice. And over time, like while you've been living here in Coconut Grove in the years you've lived here, how have you seen development specifically affect the Coconut Grove area and the neighborhood?
Well, it's been pretty sad because I think I was pretty naive, and so were my neighbors in the early 90s when some of the development first started to happen in the Center Grove, and profiteering developers came in and started buying up all the little houses that were built in the 20s and 30s, and they started tearing them down and building duplexes and maxing out the square footage of the properties and cutting down all the old growth trees and then selling those townhouses. So they were building 2 units on each residential lot that was previously a single family house there. So that's when we started mobilizing and trying to pass some planning resolutions to change the course of the development that was happening. But we had so much opposition from politicians and attorneys who were working for the developers. And so things didn't exactly go our way. But that makes it even more important to save the prestigious historic landmarks that we have left.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on that note of prestigious historic landmarks, the Coconut Grove Playhouse is the one in question now today. Why is the preservation of the Coconut Grove Playhouse really important to you and to members of your neighborhood and community?
Well, number one, we've already lost some important historic landmarks right down the street from the Playhouse. One was the St. Stephen's 1912 chapel that was torn down in 2008. We started recognizing a similar pattern that led to the destruction of that historic landmark. I could go into the details of how that happened, but it set a new precedent. And a previous commissioner, his name is Mark Sarnoff, he was working with the church and the pastor. You know, both of those people came from another place to further their careers in Coconut Grove, but they ended up doing what was in their own personal best interest instead of what was in the best interest of the community. And so they presented a rendering to the public about what they were going to do to build a new school and a new retail building, but they didn't disclose the fact that they were going to tear down the 1912 chapel. And so they raised donations for their mixed-use project to construct the project, and everybody was under the impression that the 1912 chapel was going to be preserved, so that's why they donated to the project. Everyone was really upset and dismayed when we found out that they had gotten a demolition permit for the chapel because that wasn't previously disclosed. So they had a system down for getting the project approval and lying to the public to get a demolition permit. And then we found out just a couple of days before the building was cleared from the site, and we were trying to renege their demolition permit since they had lied to get it. So they obtained it unlawfully. So when the building department opened up on a Monday morning, at 8 o'clock, we were gonna be able to legally renege their demolition permit. So they quickly rushed in the middle of the night on a Sunday to finish demolishing the building before we could do that. And so I was there with a prominent historian, Arbormore Parks, and George Hernandez, who ironically enough is the preservation architect for Architectonica now, who's trying to demolish the Playhouse. We were there trying to save the 1912 chapel from demolition. And when they finally finished demolishing it in the middle of the night, like on a Sunday, Arbormore Parks was crying and she called that project the Sacrificial Lamb. And she and I vowed to never let that happen again. And we started crafting the wording of a resolution that would later be passed by the county that vowed to educate the citizenry about the importance of historic preservation and to never let something like that happen again. And so that resolution passed in 2009. And so we've been using that resolution lately as an example to show Commissioner Regalado and Mayor Daniela Cava that this has been an ongoing problem, and that the destruction of St. Stephen's, that was, where the demolition permit was unlawfully obtained by then Commissioner Sarnoff, who's an attorney from another place, right? So he doesn't have roots in this community, and he was just interested in helping the pastor of St. Stephen's profit off of the demolition of the chapel. Now there's a big retail building where the chapel used to sit, and they rent it out for a lot of money. And so the work of the church has become about making profits and giving themselves raises. And the work of the politicians has been lining their pockets with donations from developers, right? And so, unfortunately, the work of some architects in town that used to be respected have their work is no longer about doing what's in the best interest of the community, but about making profits for themselves. So that's really unsettling for those of us who have lived here for a long time, because there's not very many important historic, cultural, iconic buildings left in our community. So we're willing to fight to the bitter end to make sure that those that are left are properly preserved according to the standards that are put forth by the Department of the Interior. There's really specific guidelines for renovating historic buildings, that do allow the integration of modern technology. So they do allow the buildings to be updated while still being preserved. So that's what we're trying to do, and we're going to do it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So one other thing I was going to mention, South Florida is known for a place for really good attorneys who are bad people to come and make a lot of money working in conjunction with developers and politicians. And that's what happened with Commissioner Sarnoff. And that's why we lost the 1912 chapel. And so that set a new precedent, right? So that because they succeeded in that, they thought that they could also succeed in demolishing the Playhouse. But the difference between then and now, when that tragedy happened, when we lost the 1912 chapel in 2008, is that now we have social media. Facebook had just gotten started then, and people weren't using it for activism yet, but we've been using it for activism in Coconut Grove. And so that's why we've been able to get the word out about what's really happening with the architectonic plan for the Playhouse. And so that's why our movement has sustained for as long as it has. And when one person gets tired, there's 20 more people waiting to take their place, right? So it just keeps growing and persisting. That's why we're not going to lose.
So that was actually my next question, is how you are mobilizing and organizing people to fight back. You're mentioning social media. What specific platforms are you using, and how are you using them to organize people? And not just social media, but other platforms as well, other strategies that you're using to fight back against the demolition?
Well, the number one strategy that I've been using is telling the story about St. Stephen's, because in law and in architecture, precedent is what sets the pace for what's going to happen next. And so in law and in architecture in Coconut Grove, the people who were responsible for destroying the 1912 chapel and eliminating a really critical part of our neighborhood history and Miami's history, they thought that they were on a roll because they set a new precedent for capitalizing off of property that's close to the water. So the reason why the property values are so high in Coconut Grove is because much of Coconut Grove sits on a ridge. So these available parcels are at 14 feet or above sea level rise. So because of climate change, these are becoming even more valuable because as the sea rises, that those property values are only going to increase because we're running out of property that's going to be safe from sea level rise, right? So the Coconut Grove Playhouse parcel is the largest available parcel, developable parcel at the highest elevation above the sea, above the rising sea. So that's what makes it so valuable. That's also what made the property that the 1912 chapel sat on, just a half a block from the Playhouse on Main Highway, so valuable. And so the politicians and the developers and the attorneys worked together to set a new precedent for making these parcels available for development. And they thought they were going to get away with it, but now we started telling the truth about it. So when we start to tell the real story about what's been happening, luckily we have social media as a tool to help spread the word. And then we're able to get a lot of community members to help out because they're really passionate about this neighborhood. So, you know, people's parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were married in the 1912 chapel, people who still live in this neighborhood. And their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents also attended movies and theatrical performances at the Coconut Grove Playhouse. And they have, you know, great family memories of those two important places that play such a critical role in the history and the development of Coconut Grove, which was Miami's very first neighborhood. My daughter and one of my students at Miami-Dade College set up a Q&A with Mayor Daniela Cava when she was running for office. And they had gotten a lot of attention about a march that they organized. It was called the March for Black Lives in Coconut Grove, and they organized it to draw attention to the problem of gentrification in Coconut Grove. And Mayor Cava was really interested in that, and so she invited them to organize a Q&A for other students at Miami-Dade College. This is when Daniela Cava was running for office. And so Daniela Cava showed a sincere interest in the younger generation in Coconut Grove and the problems that were happening in Coconut Grove. So we had a lot of faith that she was going to be on our side and do the right thing, but that hasn't been the case so far. We had a meeting with her last week, and she basically just passed the buck to Commissioner Raquel Regalado, who has been saying a lot of things that just simply aren't true about the history of the Playhouse and about what the people in the neighborhood want to happen to the Playhouse parcel. In 2004, the voters of Miami-Dade County voted to restore the Coconut Grove Playhouse. And ever since then, the county has been using our own tax money to fight against us, the voters, who voted to use our money for restoration, to do a completely different project, as if this is their own private development project. And so when I tell you that a lot of attorneys move to South Florida, they're good attorneys, but they're really bad people, these are the type of people that the county has been working with to get projects like this completed, you know, even though the voters of Miami-Dade County voted to do something completely different.
That is really interesting because that reminds me of the duplex from last year that you were talking about. There's this question about transparency from the city, right? So how transparent has the city been about what is going to happen to the Playhouse? It sounds like you're saying that you feel that you were misled to think that it was going to be fully restored, and instead they decided to demolish it and make a smaller one, right? That's the idea, to make a smaller one surrounded by shops and restaurants. So how does that transparency work with the city? I'm not familiar with the laws that, you know, are in place in order to protect voters from that. I mean, how much can you really do, you know, once you voted for something and then they go back and decide to do something else, right?
Yes. Okay. So, well, it's not the city, it's the county. So we have a county mayor and we have a city mayor. So we pay a lot of taxes to both the city and the county, but our property tax go to pay for a bond issue, which that money is used for public projects, right? So they're using our money to build a public project. So we're the client, we're the primary stakeholders, right? So the architects are designing for us. The county is doing the project for us that we're paying for, right? So we're the client. But instead they're taking matters into their own hands, and they have a different set of stakeholders that they're serving, which are developers and business owners who want to go into business, but investing in commercial retail space that they're trying to develop on the Playhouse parcel. But there's a covenant in the deed of the Playhouse, which is owned by the state of Florida. And the covenant states that the property must be used as a theater forever. And so they found a way around it, right? With the help of their smart attorneys who are bad people. So they found a way around it. And they also went into a partnership with FIU. And I think it's kind of interesting that the ex-commissioner who I mentioned that helped get St. Stephen's demolished is on the board of directors at FIU. And one of his responsibilities has something to do with acquisition of facilities and property for FIU. So I think there might be something there that maybe you could talk to them about. But to get back to your question, we as the stakeholders, right, we have to constantly remind Miami-Dade County that we are the clients, not that they're the investors who are interested in developing the Playhouse parcel for their own personal needs. Is not their private development project. It's a public project. So therefore, it's their duty by law to serve the public, right? So there needs to be a community participatory process in master planning the Playhouse parcel if they're going to even stray a little bit from what the voters voted for in 2004, which is to preserve the Playhouse. So it's a big parcel, right? So they also want to do some commercial space, some retail space, and a parking garage. And there is room for that on the Playhouse parcel, but they shouldn't move forward with any of that without public input, because we are the owners, we are the clients, we are the primary stakeholders of the property. We pay for it with our hard-earned tax money. That's why we pay such high taxes in Coconut Grove. So we're not going to take no for an answer. There's also a hotel being developed right behind the Playhouse parcel, and 6 residential lots were recently upzoned from residential to commercial. So now they can build a 6-story hotel, and that design is in the works. And so that's on one side of the Playhouse parcel on Charles Avenue. And then on the other side of the Playhouse parcel on Main Highway is a 5-story architectonic design and owned building, right? And the parking garage that is planned for the Coconut Grove Playhouse parcel is intended, I mean, they don't say this, but we know, is intended to serve the hotel project and this new commercial office building. So you see, they have their own master plan in mind and their own set of stakeholders that they're serving, which don't include the general public, us, the voters who live in the neighborhood, you know, who are descendants of original settlers of Coconut Grove, Miami's very first community, right? And some of those people still live here and hold very dear memories about the Playhouse, about the St. Stephen's 1912 chapel. And that's why they're not going to stand for just handing over these precious cultural resources to the interest of developers.
So how is the county responding to the backlash and the protests and the billboards and the socialized, the social media organizing? I mean, how are they reacting to it?
They're responding by taking our hard-earned tax dollars to fund a legal campaign against us. So, and they're taking our own words that we put on social media about why the Playhouse is so important to us and why it's so important to preserve it. And they're copying our words and reframing them in the context of their design, which is basically a mall with a tiny auditorium in the center. So they're trying to intentionally trick the general public into thinking that they're doing what we asked them to do, which couldn't be further from the truth. So it's actually really unethical and really disappointing and kind of sickening when you think about it.
Yeah, that's shocking, actually. And yeah, wow, I can't believe that. When will the fate of the Coconut Grove Playhouse be decided? Is there a vote on this, or how does it work exactly?
Well, we have a lawsuit pending right now that Mayor Suarez vetoed a decision by the city commission to allow the county's plan to move forward. And so now the county is using our tax dollars to sue the city and Mayor Suarez because Mayor Suarez exercised his right to veto the project as we requested him to do. And so we're waiting for the result of that lawsuit to be disclosed. And then no matter what happens with that one, we have another lawsuit pending. And then I can't tell you any details about it now, but after that one, we have another one. And then after that one, we have another one. I think so far we have a total of 7 lawsuits in the wing with a couple of different attorneys organizing them. And so we're hoping that sooner or later the county is going to get the message that we're never going to go away and that they better get busy on preserving our playhouse like we voted to do so in 2004. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of the playhouse parcel can't be developed, but whatever happens next has to include a community participatory master planning process, such as the one that happened with the Coconut Grove Waterfront Master Plan, which is being implemented now. So that's a really important component of this project because the Playhouse sits on the corner of historic Charles Avenue, which is a historically designated street, and Main Highway, which is one of the key entry points to the Coconut Grove Commercial Court. And so historically, the entire Black Bahamian neighborhood that sits behind the Playhouse has been excluded from the development and participating in businesses that have thrived in the Coconut Grove Central Court. I'm talking about during segregation. And during segregation, there was a chain link fence topped with barbed wire around the entire Playhouse parcel. And some streets were blocked off from the historically Black Bahamian neighborhood that blocked access from that neighborhood to the mostly white central commercial core in Coconut Grove. And those barriers still exist. The chain link fence is still there. The steel supports that supported the barbed wire are still there. The barbed wire was just taken down about 2 years ago. Some of it might still be there. So, and this, to think about how little progress we've made, and now the residents of that neighborhood are still being excluded from participating in a community master plan for the gateway of their own neighborhood. So that's really disappointing, and we're not going to stand for that either.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you have to say to people that are with you and want to stop the demolition? How can they make their voices heard?
Well, they can go to our website, which is www.savethecoconutgroveplayhouse.com, and they can join our team, and they can join us in using social media to spread the word. Right now, we're getting not only support beyond Coconut Grove, we're also getting support throughout Miami, throughout the state of Florida, and now nationally and even internationally. So the New York Times is going to be writing a story about what's happening. So our movement is only growing. And so as far as when we'll see a conclusion or a resolution, well, that's really up to, according to Mayor Daniela Cava, it's up to Commissioner Raquel Regalado. And I think Cava is a strong mayor, which means she can override the commissioner's decisions, but she has chosen not to do that. And so that's really disappointing to us. So she's willing to allow the county to continue to use our own taxpayer money to fight against us. I mean, really doesn't make a lot of sense and is really unethical. And so we'd like her to reconsider so that, you know, we could get a move on with the preservation of the Playhouse according to the Department of Interior standards for historic preservation, which are really simple to follow and still allow the integration of modern theater technology. And then we can have a community master planning session to talk about what to do with the rest of the parcel. And I'm sure that we could come to a compromise about the other components that are now in the Architectonica plan. Maybe we could still have a parking garage. Maybe we could have some commercial retail space, but not without a community participatory planning process.
Yeah, you said everything I hoped you would say. So yeah, that's really all I have for you. I'm actually going to stop the recording here.
Okay, but I just wanted to
Go ahead.
Tell you quickly, like some of the, because it's not just about the historic nature of the property, it's also about what happened there, right? So a lot of really important actors got their start there, like Samuel Beckett in Waiting for Godot. That was one of the very first performances at the Playhouse. Harry Belafonte, Tennessee Williams, Denzel Washington, Jimmy Buffett, Marlene Dietrich, Cheetah Rivera, Lucille Ball, Rita Marino, Jose Ferrer, Samuel L. Jackson, Nell Carter, Patti LaBelle, and Jimmy Buffett and David Crosby also performed there. And they said that they want to do so again. So I see it's not just a playhouse for acting, it's a playhouse for musical performances too. And it's also been used for other things over the years, like public meetings and children's educational programs. We want to see all that kind of stuff happen again. So I could talk about the Playhouse forever.
You're welcome to. Before I stop the recording, if you want to say anything else, feel free.
Well, I wanted to show you a rendering of the Architectonica plan. One of the things that they are aspiring to do is to rip out some of the historic elements that make the Playhouse so special, right? So these are some of the historic elements in this picture right here, the Solomonic columns right here, and some other architectural details that they want to put in this like mausoleum style display in the lobby of their auditorium, in the belly of their commercial retail mall. This is how they want to display the historic elements. And this is a design by George Hernandez from the University of Miami, and they're calling him their historic preservation architect, but it's pretty disappointing to think that he would think that that's okay. And I don't really believe that. So that's why I'm hoping you'll talk to him. Here's some of their other renderings. So since CocoWalk had such a short design life, less than 25 years, and then it was torn down, and now it was rebuilt as an office complex with a courtyard. So we think that the Architectonica plan is really intended to take the place of the CocoWalk that was torn down. So these are some of the renderings of the Architectonica plan that show it basically being utilized as a commercial retail space, similar to the old CocoWalk that had a design life of less than 25 years. And the Playhouse, is almost 100 years old because it was built with superior building materials and superior construction methods, and it's lasted almost 100 years. And with proper maintenance and repairs, it can last another 100 years. And it's also really interesting to think about who built the Playhouse. It was built by the hands of Bahamian settlers who lived in the neighborhood behind the Playhouse. Yet they never really have gotten credit for their fine craftsmanship and knowledge of how to build in the harsh South Florida environment. But they were the ones who taught the northern settlers how to build in Coconut Grove, because the northern settlers had no clue how to build in this harsh environment with the materials that were available, such as the oolitic limestone that sits just a couple feet below our feet here in Coconut Grove. But the Bahamian settlers knew how to quarry that and how to crush it to make aggregate to build concrete blocks with formwork that they crafted by hand. So those concrete blocks that were used to build the Playhouse in 1926 are larger and stronger than the ones that are manufactured today. And the Dade County pine floor trusses and roof trusses that were used to build the Coconut Grove Playhouse are far superior than the floor trusses and roof trusses that we build today. And one reason for that is because Dade County pine doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, it exists, but it's no longer used as a building material. There's some people who are trying to bring it back, but it's going to take years and years to get the quantity of Dade County pine that we'll need to build with it again. So it's harder than concrete, or as hard as concrete. And I know this to be true because my own house, which is a couple blocks from the Playhouse, was also built in 1926 out of the same concrete blocks and the same Dade County pine floor and roof trusses that the Playhouse were. And one time I was doing some renovations on my house and I had to saw through one of the floor trusses, and it was literally impossible. I got the strongest guy that I knew to try to help me saw through it, and we only got through like about a quarter of an inch before we realized it wasn't going to work, and we had to give up. And we went with a different plan that didn't include compromising the integrity of the Dade County pine. And that's when I realized, wow, this is really valuable stuff. And no building that was built with Dade County pine should be destroyed, because it will last literally hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years. I think, sure, is termite resistant. Why would you destroy buildings that comprise of termite resistant wood? Like, that's really valuable stuff. Super sustainable, right? And the greenest building that exists is the one that's not demolished, is the one that already exists, right? It's already built with superior building materials, like the Coconut Grove Playhouse. So that's why it's important to give credit to the craftsmen who built it, because they had knowledge that the owner of the Playhouse property didn't have, and he counted on them. There's also an interesting story about that you might want to look into, because the original owner of the property at the Playhouse was a Bahamian settler by the name of Frau. He was a white Bahamian, and E.W.F. Stirrup was a black Bahamian who came to Coconut Grove after Frau and was looking for work, and he got work clearing property for Frau, and Frau couldn't afford to pay him, so he paid him in land. So Frau was able to obtain a lot of property in the Grove, and he became rich off of that property. And then he started building super high quality buildings on the land that he acquired from Frau. And he built buildings with Dade County pine and concrete blocks that were made by hand that contained aggregate from the oolitic limestone that was right under his feet. And so the Playhouse parcel, it was adjacent to some property that was also on Main Highway that was owned by some white northern settlers. And Rudy Birdine was interested in developing the Playhouse property into a movie theater. And so he entered into a partnership with E.W.F. Stirrup to build this movie theater, but then he ended up ripping off Stirrup and stealing his portion of the partnership. And so then he developed the movie theater by himself and left Stirrup out of the deal. So just totally ripped him off and took advantage of him. Stirrup ended up being okay because he owned lots of other property. But kind of an interesting story. It's interesting to note that it was Bahamian owned originally. So there's a lot of interesting stories about the development of the Playhouse that have been told. So that's one, and another one is about all the amazing actors who got their start there right after desegregation. And so that's why I wanted you to talk to Cornelia Dozier, because she was one of them. And she has a lot of great stories.
Very cool. That's an amazing history. I didn't even know all of that. So thank you for adding that on.
Yeah, those 6 parcels right behind the Playhouse on historic Charles Avenue that I told you about that have just been upzoned.
Yeah.
For a 6-story hotel. On those parcels, there were some shotgun houses that were made out of Dade County pine. Yeah, and I have. Oh, I wish I could show you the pictures of them. You want to see a picture of them? Let me see if I can find them on my computer really fast. So I'll share my screen, because I teach architecture at Miami-Dade College, and so I've taught like 6 different architecture courses there, and one is architectural design, 1 and 2. And so in that class, I tried to integrate some of the lessons about the history of our community into the architectural projects that my students do. So they did a historic precedent study on some of the original buildings in Coconut Grove. So these are 2 of the shotgun houses that were torn down right behind the Playhouse parcel. So these were on one of the 6 residential lots that have recently been upzoned to accommodate a 6-story hotel. And so the city of Miami and Commissioner Ken Russell, who has been a great advocate for the West Grove, unlike the previous commissioner. So he was trying to save these shotgun houses from demolition, and because the property switched hands, and a person who just doesn't care about the history of the Grove was attempting to demolish them. And so Ken Russell proposed for them to be designated historic. And so there was a planning and zoning meeting, and they were on the verge of being designated historic. But as soon as the new owner of this property got wind of that, he immediately demolished them before the historic designation was able to move forward. So during that time, Ken Russell and his assistant were desperately looking for a place for these to be moved to before the new owner could demolish them, because there are a lot of people in the community who care about these little houses, and we want to save as many of them as possible. So anyhow, my students, they went and measured other buildings like this that still exist in the neighborhood and took the measurements and stuff, and then they used the photographs of these exact shotgun houses that were located behind the Playhouse to do intricate drawings and 3D models and digital models, and then they built physical models. So that was also a way for them to learn the history and the value of the original Coconut Grove architecture while developing their technical skills. This is the Mariah Brown House, which is also on historic Charles Avenue. Oh,
wow.
Yeah, this model was built by Vanya Allen, who I told you about. Worked with my daughter Olivia Meyer Massey, also a graduate of Miami-Dade College, to organize the March for Black Lives to draw attention to the gentrification that's been happening in Coconut Grove. So see, it all relates, right? It all relates back to the Playhouse, because the original Bahamian Bedlars were the craftsmen that built the Playhouse, right? But they've been left out of the history of the Playhouse. And, and to think that this is a presentation for the Mariah Brown House done by one of my other students. To think that the architectonic plan designates historic Charles Avenue as a service entrance to their mega commercial retail development project on the Playhouse parcel is just, wow, really missing the point and really disappointing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so when Arva and I crafted the wording for the resolution after the unlawful destruction of the St. Stephen's 1912 chapel, the resolution that was passed by Miami-Dade County to educate the citizenry about the importance of historic preservation in our community. Then shortly after that, I started teaching at Miami-Dade College, and this was one of my ways of honoring the wishes of our Moore Parks. It's even more important now because she passed away recently. And so that's another reason why we're fighting hard to honor her wishes and her legacy, because she was a really prominent historian in our community who cared deeply about preserving the Playhouse. And actually preserving the Playhouse was the very last project that she was working on when she died. She literally died sitting at her computer sending out emails. And it was like 2 days before that I had talked to her about our next move for saving the Playhouse. So I'm pretty sure she was emailing somebody in our group about the Playhouse. This is a master site model done by my students at Miami-Dade College. And it shows a lot of the architecture. It's a master planning model, but it's all within the boundaries of the CRA, which is an initiative started by Ken Russell to capture property taxes in the neighborhood, and then in turn use some of that tax money for things like historic preservation and projects that the community needs. So interestingly enough, the Coconut Grove Playhouse, which is within the CRA boundaries, has been left out of the CRA master plan because the county has their own plan for the development of the Playhouse parcel, and they don't want it to be part of the CRA because they're trying to make it their own private development project. The CRA has money for historic preservation, which is funded with our own property taxes, yet they're leaving out the Coconut Grove Playhouse parcel from the CRA, but it's clearly within the CRA boundaries. We can just look at a map and see that. They did a whole master plan study recently, and the Playhouse parcel was left out of it. So that's another avenue for you to check out. But this is on my Instagram, and I'll send you a link to it later. It's called Meyer Art. But see, these are little descriptions that talk about my students' ideas for the Playhouse parcel and for the surrounding neighborhoods. And it's all about, this was Vanya Allen's insert for her design, and it's all about reconnecting the historic Bahamian neighborhood behind the Playhouse parcel to the commercial core. So this is on Thomas Avenue, and it's going through the Playhouse parcel to connect to the traditionally white commercial core. Because the neighborhood behind the Playhouse parcel was formerly called Kibo, and it was a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood, and Charles Avenue was a vibrant mixed-use street that had its own sustainable businesses on the street. But then during segregation, when they were cut off from the rest of the neighborhood, with the barbed wire fencing that was around the Playhouse parcel and the blocked off dead end streets that led to the commercial core, those businesses slowly started to die. And so they've never really recovered from that, except now, of course, through gentrification, the whole neighborhood is changing, and all these historic buildings are being torn down, and that their history and legacy is being destroyed. So that's what Olivia and Vanya's March for Black Lives was trying to highlight, the problem of gentrification in the Grove. This is the model of a stirrup house done by one of my students. So this is where EWF Stirrup lived, right across the street from the Playhouse. He built this house for his family. I think after he sold the Playhouse parcel, or after he got ripped off by Birdine. This is a 3D printed model of the stirrup house by one of my students. Here's another view. This is a laser cut basswood model. But you can check out the models on my Instagram later if you want to. But I just wanted to give you the full overview of the neighborhood. So these, not just about the Playhouse, it's also about the neighborhood behind the Playhouse.
Right, of course. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me.